Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. The chances are you go to events. Maybe it's conferences, offsites, awards dinners, training days, or trade shows. And some of them are genuinely great. But most, let's be honest, they're not really. Now, as someone who attends a lot of events, presents at them, and works with clients to help design better ones, I'm always interested in what makes some of them feel energizing and others feel like a slow slide into despair. That's why I was really excited to speak to my guest on this episode, Tahira Endean. She's an experienced event strategist, educator, and co-founder of Strategy Table, and she curates content for IMEX, one of the world's biggest gatherings for the MICE industry. That's meetings, incentives, conventions, and exhibitions, which puts her right at the center of thinking about how and why we bring people together. Tahira's new book, Our KPI is Joy, asks a question that might sound strange in a business context. What if we measured the success of our events by how much joy they deliver? In this conversation, we explore what joy really means and what it definitely doesn't. We look at why most events are mediocre, how small design tweaks can make a huge difference, what we can learn from little details like beanbags, shrimps, name badges, and the emotional roller coaster of simply trying to find your seat. This episode isn't just for event professionals, it's for anyone who's ever sat through a badly lit, badly structured panel discussion and wondered, why the hell am I here? With all of that said, it's my discussion with Tahira Endean on why joy should be a KPI. Tahira, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Christian.
I'm so excited to have you here because, as I was saying to you before we started recording, with your book, you tapped into something amazing that's been bugging me. But before we come on and talk about that, can you just tell my listeners a little bit about what you do?
Oh, well, mostly I just travel in a bit of a suitcase. But the work that I do, I have been working in the spectrum of events for more than 3 decades now, and I love it. It's super rewarding. And I teach. So I teach event strategy and design. I work with a group called IMEX, which is an incredible, it's the heartbeat of the global community for MICE, meetings, incentives, conventions, and exhibitions. And I program the content for those shows, which host 14 to 15,000 people each year, May in Frankfurt, Vegas in October. And what that means is that I spend all of my time thinking about how are people going to meet better and how can I bring the people who are leading the way to be in front of them and to keep it fascinating. And then just because that wasn't quite enough, I also just recently co-founded a little company called Strategy Table. A little now, it's going to, continue to grow. It's brand new and it's very old. It's brand new in that it's new for us, but the work that we've been doing, which is all around bringing people together to talk about change, which is a constant, is what is the work that we've all been doing for a long time, and now we're just doing it together. So a few things, actually.
Wow. I love that. I love people with little fingers in lots of different pies, but are sort of on a mission. Let's start by sort of talking about the title of the book. The idea that joy should be a KPI seems counterintuitive, right? It's not something we would normally pick, which I guess is the point.
It is actually the point. So when I first titled it, my husband said, "What's a KPI?" So I was like, okay, well, that is actually a really great question. So, KPI, a key performance indicator, is something that it's actually something he has in his job. It's just that's not what they call it. They call it a goal. But it's something that we work with a lot in events because especially when you get into, incentive or reward events, people are rewarded on meeting their KPIs. Then they get to go on a fabulous, trip or they get some kind of other reward. And then they go on these events and you know what people really want on those events right now? Free time. Well, when we talk about time being our greatest value, why are we not trying to squeeze more joy out of that time? Because what we do know, the subtitle of the book is Our KPI is Joy. How do we use live events to catalyze happiness, productivity, and trust? And those 3 things are the reason that we do anything that's in business. If we aren't going to do business with people we don't trust, we aren't going to be productive if we're unhappy. So it all ties together. And so I think all of us have been to a lot of mediocre events that people are
Gotcha.
millions in often. So why? Like, just stop being mediocre as events get more and more expensive, and that applies to every business because every business is investing in events, every association is investing in events, sponsors are investing in events, people are investing their own registration dollars in events. Why go and waste time, which is our most precious resource? So this is what it's all about, basically.
I love the way you sort of depict the work, because I think it's easy to think of, the average listener to this is going to sort of think like, okay, there's conferences, right? So that's a big thing but actually what you're talking about is just generally if we're going to get people together, which I guess is the common feature of all the things you talked about,
Yes.
then let's make sure that time feels like it's well spent, that people, I mean, literally are enjoying themselves, as opposed to it feels torturous. And your description of mediocre events, I think, is often generous, because some of them are just, it's like literally, I can't think. In many cases, I've sat there, thought, I can't think of any place I'd rather, like any place worse to be. Awful, 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 boring, uncomfortable seats, just like every aspect of it, ill considered. And so I love this idea of effectively saying, if we're going to convene people for an experience, let's make it an amazing experience. So that back to that idea of joy. And so I love this philosophy of just sort of thinking, okay, this is costing money and the price is going up. And so let's maximize that in a way that I guess we would look to maximize anything that we do. We want to maximize, get the best out of it.
Well, in theory, like we say that about our lives, we want to have the best life. And the best life is very relative to what your current situation is. And, we're also living in a world where social media is our biggest disruptor. It is something where, everything becomes either two things happen on social media. It's either aspirational, you are unlikely to be walking the red carpet somewhere, or you might get to, but for most of the world, it's something that we're going to watch on television, or it's vulnerable. And that's the other aspect of joy, is that we have this idea that, it's an emoji. Joy, it's I've set you a smiley face. It's like, no, joy, that's not what joy is. What joy is tiny moments that happen around all of the regular stuff. And some of that regular stuff is sorrow. And, one of the things that, I'm going to just go back to one of the very beginning things, which of time. One of the very beginning things of time is when language was invented. The Latin root passis is the root for two words, passion and suffering. So thousands of years ago, when language was being invented, the humans recognized that we can't have one without the other. People always say, I'm so passionate about what I do. Are you? Great. Then that means you've suffered for it at some point. And that's the human condition. So when we go to events, not only are they often boring, they flatline us. And there's nothing in flatlining us. Nothing comes out of that. We're okay to be challenged and provoked, and the way we should be setting up events is so that people do have space for dialogue and disagreement and dissension in a respectful way, so that you can come around and agree. Sometimes you're going to agree to disagree. Sometimes you're going to change your point of view. The point is that you've now formed a collaboration of some kind. And from that collaboration, you have a connection. From that connection, you might have a bit of frustration, and you might not quite get to joy, but you're certainly going to get to a feeling. Like, let's just get people to a feeling at an event. If that feeling becomes joy, that's great. But it's going to be, that's going to happen in moments. It's not. Also, if you went to an event and you were like this the whole time, that would also be horrible. Humans are not designed to live here all the time either. We are designed to have arcs. So we need to build arcs into our events.
And I love that sorrow and joy, the sort of yin and yang view of the world, because it always struck me that if you're one of these people that goes, yay, it's Friday, amazing. By default, that means Monday's going to be terrible, right? If you're that excited to close out the week, then you're going to be dreading the next one. And so I love this idea of thinking about things. And so you're effectively, you're not saying, right, every single moment needs to be like, whoa, we're having a great time, right? This just needs to go with the ebb and flow of how we feel. But I guess what you're pointing towards is that we want, if we're getting people together, we need to make sure that they are experiencing something. And I guess something they wouldn't get otherwise. There's no point in replicating what you can get in other things. So we're looking at giving them an experience and memories that they wouldn't get otherwise.
100%. And I'll use the sort of the micro example of the work that I do at IMEX. And so there's every single association from around the globe comes to IMEX that is involved in the meeting and event sector. All of them have a session. All of them have their own events around the world. All of them do their own things. When I build a program, and I build about 120, we have about 200 sessions. I curate about 120 of them. And then those partners and others bring other sessions to us. So through the year, I work with them to see what they're going to be bringing. And it's very consistent with their messaging and their branding and their audience. Perfect. That's great. That's exactly what we want. What I try to do is to find the collisions. Who are the people that would never meet if I didn't introduce them to do a session together? Often they're uncomfortable with that. It's very easy to go and stand on stage as a speaker and talk about what you know. It's much more difficult to talk to somebody else and find out that you have a lot of things in common, but you also have these other points of intersection and you have differing views, and to bring those to an audience. That's when it's interesting for the audience. So that's what I try to do. And so that's when I'm planning events, which I did for a long, long time, that's what we would look for, is to find those places that people can have those collisions of ideas and to create through a variety of methodologies and setups and different ways of setting up venues so that people have different ways to meet. We set up a trade show once for an event. It was 5,000 people with no walls. So you could stand at one side of the room and you could see people on the other side of the room. There was no pipe and drape. There was lower walls and divisions, and so each organization was differentiated, but it wasn't closed in. It wasn't like as you walk, and we've all done this. You walk past a trade show booth. What do? You glance. You avert your eyes. Somebody tries to make eye contact. We've all done it.
I feel seen here, but yes.
There's no joy in that, not for anybody. What you're trying to do when you're creating a business event, and let's face it, most events are business events. It's easy. It's not even easy. It's easier to find joy at a music festival where you've chosen to go. Again, they're often not that well curated. You have to watch 8 bands you don't even know to see the band you want to, right? So the great thing about music festivals is the opportunity for those 8 bands to be seen. But you're often sitting in uncomfortable places. You're often not having a VIP experience. You're waiting in line to go to the bathroom. You're waiting in line to get a drink. You're waiting in line to get food. There's so many experiences that we could make better with just some thought and planning and design. Just find joy into your events in more meaningful ways.
And I love that. I hadn't really reflected on this, but you're absolutely right. There's things that there's stuff that we sort of have to go to. And then there's stuff that we choose to go to. But even the stuff that we choose to go to your point, is often it's terribly curated. It's kind of like we sort of put up with it. And one of the things that I find really interesting is I think we're getting more demanding, right? Because we can see what good looks like. And I think if we think about corporate events, we've all experienced for me, the pandemic was a shifting point, because suddenly we brought the business into the personal. And so the competition for work engagement was whatever else it is in your life, that your pet, or going out for a walk, or Peloton, or Netflix, whatever it was, right? The cooking, whatever the thing. And so it seems to me that we've all sort of got to a point where we kind of know that what's good and what's bad, and our expectations are increasing. And so it seems to me it's incumbent on people to do better. And so that's what you're really pushing people towards, is to say that enough of the phoning it in events. Let's organize things that people really want to go to. And to your point, it wasn't historically a case that the stuff you wanted to go to was amazing and the stuff that you didn't necessarily want to go to was always terrible. There was this weird sort of spectrum. And I guess the joy, to use your term, that I find in what you do, is you're going, we can be so much better. If we think about the people that are coming to this and what they're going to get out of it, we can do so much better than we do most of the time.
And to give them some of the tools, right? And the things to think about. So, in 2017, I wrote a book that's called Intentional Event Design. And that is, now is 2017, before the pandemic, before all those things. And that's very much more of a textbook for anybody, whether you're an administrative professional or a seasoned event planner. It's a toolkit of things to think about differently, whether it's for learning and performance design or that your brain shows up at every event, and so this is the other thing, is that we forget that we designed this event for one of my friends calls them, what's she called, the mass evolution. So, or, basically that we're designing for the masses instead of designing for the individuals. So in some ways you have to design for the fact that a bunch of people are going to come to your event. Yes, 100%. And they're going to probably sit in a general session room, and you are going to 110% hit the mark for some people on those keynote speakers that you pick. But how many times have we sat in a general session and we've all been there? You're laughing, It's just like, well, can I please watch somebody I don't know get an award? Can I please hear a very scripted message? Right?
Yeah, just,
Okay, what made you hysterical?
we're recording this during what for me is conference season, and so the dynamics that you're talking about, either I have just recently experienced, right, or I have the venues I have been in have reminded me of previous experiences of them.
Yes, and it doesn't take much to sort of, surprise and delight, and to consider the humans who show up. And we show up in very specific ways, right? We show up and nobody shows up in an event knowing exactly where to go. And how do we help them? Because by not helping them at that point, all you're doing is setting up barriers that are harder for us to get over. It doesn't matter if you're the biggest extrovert in the world. If you show up and you don't know where you are, you might talk to somebody faster than an introvert, but you're still less comfortable. And when you're less comfortable, as soon as I say uncomfortable, what happens? All of us get a little shrinking inside, right? We know what uncomfortable feels like. You can't, in an uncomfortable state, find joy at an event because you're uncomfortable. And your brain is not open to the idea of learning or connecting. So you have to ease people into that idea that here you are at somewhere special. Here you are at somewhere that we're going to take care of you. Here you are at somewhere that you might find some joy. You might meet somebody that's interesting. You might hear something that fills your heart. You might, listen to something that's, like what I was just at an event 2 weeks ago. One of the best parts of the event was for people was sitting in a sound bath, talking to nobody, just listening to music with your eyes closed. That is great on one hand, but also ridiculous on the other hand. You go to an event to sit by yourself quietly, but you felt something from that. Whereas that shouldn't be the moment that you feel the most when you have paid quite a lot of money generally to go and be at an event with other people. So your best memory shouldn't be sitting in a dark room listening to music with other people.
But I love this idea of kind of comfort, because again, I'm sort of have this PTSD in the sense of turning up and you're like, where do I need to go? What is it? Where's the day? And even like just turning, and it's always like turn up to a hotel for a conference or something. It's like, where do I go? What's happening? What are these people? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Right. And sort of feels a bit weird. And what I love is you're saying, let's create comfort so that we can also make people feel uncomfortable, but in a good way. Right, not uncomfortable in a kind of like, what is this? Where do I go? What's happening? What's up next? Right, we want to pass all of that stuff so that the discomfort we're feeling is a challenge to us, is useful discomfort.
That exactly, and discomfort and challenge, again, human condition. Nobody wants to just really. They might say they do, but nobody actually just wants to float through life, never learning anything, never being challenged, never overcoming. The reason that we learn music, that we learn language, that we improve, that we play sports, we get better, that we go back to school when you're like I did when I was past 50 to do a master's, is because we actually like to overcome challenges. When we can create challenges that you can overcome and prototype and test and dialogue about in in the safety, the psychological safety of an event, you're going to get to answers and solutions and new ideas and innovations so much faster. I think back to 1996. One of the very first big events I worked on was the 11th International Conference on AIDS, and it was pretty much the year antiretrovirals came out. So at that time we had, our artist was Joe Average, who did all of the artwork for it, and another Tico Kerr. They weren't expected to live 2 more years at that point. And I think one of them at least is still alive, and one of them recently passed away because of the work that was done by the doctors and researchers from 135 countries that were there. The antiretrovirals weren't invented in a vacuum. They were invented because people came together, saw a need, a challenge of something happening around the world, and addressed it and created these magic little cocktails that continue to save millions of lives. Without meetings, that wouldn't have happened. We didn't even have the internet for most of that planning cycle. So they weren't meeting in other ways. They had to meet face to face. So the, uh, you know, idea of meeting face to face it's a critical meeting. The World Economic Forum, they went online during COVID. It was moderately successful from an idea generation, but it wasn't the same, like many events, they went back to face as quickly as we could, um, because you ideate differently. It's when we're meeting online, which is lovely, by the way. It's very nice to meet you online, but we don't have the same visual cues. We have these tiny microsecond delays that our brain has to catch up with. So it's more work for our brain to be in a virtual meeting versus seeing somebody, meeting somebody, touching somebody. Most of the world is comfortable being touched, whether it's a handshake or a hug. And for those that aren't, totally okay. That's, everybody can have their own personal space. Eye contact is also very important. We can't build trust without some of those things. One of the things I talk about is, the history of the handshake, right? So we meet somebody now, we give them a handshake. I was just in an event where we had to meet somebody and then come up with a secret handshake, which of course we did every time we saw each other for the next 2 days. Super fun. We tried to teach it to other people. They didn't care. It's okay. I mean, we looked ridiculous. We made up a totally ridiculous handshake, so it's all good. But we'll be friends forever now because of a woman named Shayna Harrison. She's a professional wing woman, introduced this idea of creating a secret handshake. And so now we will be friends forever, Jeff and I. It's great. But the original handshake, you shook someone's hand and you felt up their arm for weapons. It had a business purpose. You wanted to make sure you were going to be safe. It still has a business purpose in that when humans touch and make eye contact, we actually activate some very important neurochemicals. So our dopamine goes up a little bit. Ideally, some oxytocin is going to go up. And without oxytocin, it's hard to get past into deep engagement. So that meeting face to face is really important to help to generate those things. But if it's not face to face, you can still create, things online. But let's talk just about how do we create joy? How do we build joy into our KPIs, and how do we make it so that it's something people take away and build connections from that lead to the next meeting with face-to-face events?
Talk to me about the business case for joy, because KPI is obviously, as illustrated by your husband, it's a sort of technical term that's created by accountants, HR. I don't know who came up with it in the first place, but that sort of, but it points towards a world where you need to make decisions that you can justify. And the beauty of the title that you've chosen is it's kind of bringing two things into collision that don't sort of belong, because you would expect KPIs to be things like sales or profitability, those kind of things that firstly can easily be measured, secondly easily understood, and thirdly justified. Joy sounds incredibly frivolous. How do we take this very human experience that we all viscerally understand and then turn that into something that is very businessy, that feels like it's at the opposite end of the sort of emotional spectrum, if you like.
So it, it goes back to the very beginning is that if you don't find joy in an event, you're not going to return. You're not going to take away or you'll take away very few things from that event. And you will not leave that event feeling that you have new tools. So why does an organization put on let's use a national sales meeting for an event? So or an international, a global sales meeting, why do you bring together your best and brightest salespeople from around the world and put them into an event? Well, you put them into an event together because you want them to hear from their most senior people. So generally that's the time that your CEO is on the stage and motivating everybody about why you work for this amazing company. So now you're sitting in a dark room. Some of you are facing forward. Some of you are awkwardly sitting with your head turned to the side because they put all the chairs facing forward, even though there's one presenter standing on a giant stage. So just curve the chairs a little bit. Start with that. At no point is it encouraged that you should actually just take 5 minutes and meet the people around you that you could have a conversation with later. But that's a good idea too. So because now you have made a point of contact. You hear your words of inspiration and the rewards that you can achieve and all of those things. And then you're going to leave that room and you're going to line up for coffee. Well, if you've lined up for coffee and now you've met somebody, well, now you can start a conversation with somebody. And it might be somebody that you are maybe, for that big incentive trip, maybe you're in competition with them. That's okay. Because you know what? At the end of the day, you have chosen to work for the same company and should all be selling more. That's the reason they brought you together at a sales conference, is to give you the tools to sell more. So whether that's, we're into launching new products, we've given you a new platform, we've given you new sales targets, all those things are happening. Now you go and you've got your coffee, you've, put your coffee down, now you've gone to your breakout sessions. And those breakout sessions are going to be, how you can be a better leader or how you can sell more product X, Y, and Z. All get their own breakouts because they're new products that are launching. And again, you go and you sit in a room, you hear somebody present it, you see some PowerPoint slides. So what if we flipped that around in a bunch of different ways, right? So you start out, you start out by meeting people. So maybe, that first touch point isn't the general session. The first touch point is an actually welcome reception where it's not loud music playing over. You already, as soon as you put all of those people into a room, your decibel level is going to be around 80 decibels. That's already hard for many people to hear. And then you're like, oh, let's have a band. Great idea. So now, because you know what I'd like to do less than anything is to stand 4 inches away from somebody to try to have a conversation. So start with a welcome reception. Start out, if you're going to have that as a dinner, maximum people at a table, 6 people. You can't have a conversation with 8 people at a table or 10 people at a table with your table. You can't even talk to the person that's 5 or 6 feet away from you at that table. You might never meet that person who's sitting across from you. So don't do that. So maximum table sizes, 4 to 6 is great because then people can have actual conversations and get to know each other a little bit. In your general sessions, make sure that people have a time to stop and meet people around them that they haven't met. Have you ever been to a conference where you know everybody's sitting around you? No. You don't even usually know the person sitting beside you. Or if you do, they're your best friend at work. And now the two of you stick together because that feels more comfortable. And then you never actually meet other people. So again, sort of defeating the purpose, right? So encourage people to connect. That's why they're there. How about in that coffee line, some of your senior managers work that line. They introduce people. They say, hey, Christian, do you know Tahira? Like, you guys are both working on this same idea of joy. Like, would you maybe have a conversation about that? Maybe you both love shrimp. Maybe you both have been to Borneo. It doesn't matter what it is. Find ways to connect people and to make it approved, have your senior leaders showing you that it's good to meet other people. When you go into those breakout sessions, how about after somebody talks at you about how to sell this product, how about you have curated tables and maybe some of those tables are people who are all from the same region, and some of those people are people who are all from different regions. You talk about how you would sell in your region, and now start to do some report backs and start to say, oh, yeah, we noticed everybody from selling from the same region that you all had this one idea. That's great. But the table that had people from 6 different regions, they had quite a different conversation. So what should we do with this information that we now know about selling this product? All of a sudden, you've given people connections, you've raised their levels of the neurochemicals that they need to create connections and to learn and to meet. They have had some conversations with other peers, which is important. They've challenged some assumptions. They've taken away some learnings. Those people are going to go back out into your world of selling. They like your company more. They feel more connected to the people that they work with. They have somebody they can call if they have a question, or send a, let's say, Teams message to, for lack of, there's many platforms, but, an internal message to if they have, they'll feel comfortable doing that because they've actually met somebody. They felt some joy during the time that they were at the event, which makes them be more productive because they have more trust in what they're doing. So it's so connected. Ways to measure that. Well, now there's lots of different ways that we can measure joy and engagement at events. So we can use anonymous facial recognition analysis. So we do that at events. One of the companies is Zenus. We've been working with them for a while. That it can tell you relative age, relative gender, and relative level of, like, if I stay somewhere for, I know that my dwell time was 7 minutes. Did my engagement increase from when I came in to when I went out? And you see that. So if you start to see that pattern repeated, that activation or that moment in time was creating more connection, more joy. You can actually here's a crazy idea, ask people. So, right? So some event.
It's radical, but I'm willing to go with it.
Yeah. So joy should be a very measurable KPI. So some events will have live concierges who are asking people, 1 or 2 questions. How are you finding your event? Are you meeting people? Are you learning things? Are you finding this a pleasant experience? Others don't. Others wait until they send the post-event survey where, your return is always crap. And then you take the results of a very small portion of people, 3 who have something to complain about, 3 who loved it, and everything else kind of, neutral to slightly agree or disagree. That's the humans, right? So that's what we do. So you need to design. I'm just gonna say that every single person listening to this needs to design an event that thinks about every single touch point. So you spend a lot of time and a lot of money designing an event, but you design it for the logistics. I've ordered this many cups of coffee. The venue will tell me where they go. The venue will send me a floor plan for how they're going to set up the event. Again, a lot of generally straight chairs or rounds of 8 or 10. I am going to spend a lot of time perhaps on making sure that the marketing team writes the right scripts for people, but then I'm never going to ask anybody how they responded to that. I'm going to worry a lot about the name badges, but then I'm going to make the font very, very small so that nobody can read it. And then I'm going to hang them at an awkward height on a person's body where it's very hard to reach. And, we do all of these things so we all need to be designing events more thoughtfully. We need to be designing for the fact that humans come. Humans don't just show up at your event with nothing. They show up with a family. They show up with a child who's standing at the airport who has a question that needs to be answered. They show up perhaps with aging parents or young children they would normally be the caretakers for, that they've given over that caretaking to somebody else, but you never really give that up. They are also, maybe they have a proposal to write or emails to answer or other outside pressures. That you also need to allocate some time and space for them to be able to do that without discomfort. And we need to think about what does it feel like? What am I sitting in? Am I sitting in an uncomfortable chair? Am I, sometimes, we also go to conferences where they're like, oh, it'll be fun. We'll have bean bags. Bean bags are awesome if you're 20. How comfortable are you getting out of a beanbag, Christian?
No.
I like every limb is splay. Like, it's not pretty getting out of a beanbag. No. But they look cool and they add a lot of color to the front of the room. That's great. If you have an event that used to have beanbags, have beanbags. If you don't have beanbags, or give people the option. Some people are comfortable just standing during an event. Some people aren't comfortable sitting for a long time. So, why not set up your event so that you have some lower seating in the front, some taller seating at the back, and actually just some stand-up tables that people can stand at. Standing isn't actually rude. Standing is actually a human function, and some people are more comfortable standing, but we have this idea that as soon as we've set up a meeting room, everybody must sit. And what we're going to do is we're going to have them, walk down a center aisle and then have to walk in 14 chairs to sit. Well, that's not what they do. They all do it so that they sit at the end, right? So now I can see the seats over there. I'm not comfortable crawling over somebody, but I'm going to have to make them move.
But when you talk about, I mean, you're exaggerating and yet not to make a point. And
No,
and
sure.
and the bit that I love about it is if we thought about other experiences where we go through a similar thing, we would generally conclude that those were not the most pleasant. So if I think about the having to crawl past people to get to a seat that's empty, that reminds me of the worst airline experiences I've had, where I have to leap over someone to, and sort of it's just generally socially awkward and not very nice. And we kind of put up with it because we're in a metal tube going from A to B. And ideally we buy our way out of that, right? If we can afford it, we don't sit in that part of the plane. And so if we take that as an example, you would kind of go, why are you replicating that for people, right? Why are you taking the worst of it? And so as I'm listening to you, I'm sort of thinking, the idea here is let's not sort of lower the bar, let's raise it, right? Let's find the best experiences people have had and try and bring that to our event.
100%, and also let's think about how are we taking care of them while they're there? So are we giving them, again, those spaces where they can have a little bit of quiet time if they need it? It doesn't take, we always think, oh, a quiet room. Like I can't waste a room at an event for a quiet room. Well, for the people who need a bit of quiet space, maybe they're an introvert doesn't mean necessarily that you're shy. An introvert actually, what it really means is that you just need more quiet time to process some of the thinking that's happened. I remember doing an event and it was in, a very large convention center. And this kid, it's in Vancouver. So we have this whole row of windows that overlooks the ocean, and we used it over the years that we did the event. 1 year that was very busy exhibit space. 1 year when we moved, so we had quite a lot more exhibit space. We actually made that just a quiet hallway. And there was chairs positioned down it, but they were solo. This wasn't really a space for conversation. It wasn't a space really even for phone calls. It was just a space for reflection and to just have a little bit of quiet time between A and B. And when we first walked through it, the acting interim CEO said, well, what's this? And so we explained it to her and she said, well, that's the biggest waste of space I've ever seen. 2 days later, she's walking through it with one of the key stakeholders who remarks on, it's so lovely to see this space being used. Like, look how many people are here. And everybody, she's like, oh yes, this is an idea that we came up with. Isn't it wonderful?
Right.
So the point of that is just to say, sometimes you're going to have an idea that not everybody's going to understand or agree with. If you know that idea is going to have benefit, stick with that one idea and test it. And the next event, test another event and test another idea. You don't have to come in and make sweeping changes to everything, but just start to make small incremental changes that are going to create a more positive experience. Bring in facilitators that are going to be able to lead a difficult conversation if you know you have to have a difficult conversation. There's lots of people who are trained to do that. And because sometimes, not everywhere everything that you're doing is going to be, if we want to make change. And I think we can safely say most of us are living right now in uncomfortable, uncertain times in our global economy. And that is going to affect different people in different ways. and it's going to affect different companies in different sectors in different ways. So if you are in a sector that is being challenged and you need to help people in your association or your organization um, come up with solutions to get past that, that's a great space to do sort of an open space, world cafe, facilitated discussions that let people just ideate. But don't leave that to chance. That's not, to just throw a bunch of people in a room and say, okay, just throw some sticky notes up on the wall and we'll be good. That just causes frustration, doesn't it? Like, how many times have you sat through those with no outcome, right? So if you are looking to help people to get to an outcome, outcomes bring joy. But sometimes that's part of the process. Part of the arc is you have to go through, we're facing a challenge. Let's face that challenge together. Let's work together because humans are willing to work. I don't know a human that is, we all like to have time off and we all like to lounge in bed on Saturday mornings, but I don't know anybody that is in a permanent state of may I please his life flat.
But I love the talking about experimentation. I think is really interesting because it seems to me that there are formats that we've all seen a million times. That you clearly will have seen it more than me. But I go to conference. I kind of know there's going to be this and this, and it's all sort of very formulaic. And people go to those playbooks, which is the kind of standard playbook for a thing. And it's that lack of experiment. You might have one radical speaker, right? We're trying something, but that's about it. And I love this idea of sort of thinking, actually, we'll just try something different, see what happens. And if it fails, it's not going to ruin the entire event. It's almost a sort of venture capital approach to these things, right? Which is to say that the only way we progress and discover what works and what doesn't is by trying stuff out. And so every event gives you the opportunity to be testing something different, something new. And as you say, not radically overhaul everything. But I love that idea of saying, let's just try something, right? Let's just see what happens. Because if you don't do that, stuff is going to fail anyway. Things are going to go wrong. They're not going to go according to plan. So I love this idea. If we just embrace that anyway, and we look at it and say, this is an opportunity to learn and try something different. And actually, maybe in the failure, something incredible comes out of it.
And don't be so afraid of failure. This is the other thing, it's like we have I call it the problem pedestal, right? So it's like, oh, there's a problem. So what do we do? Oh, I have a problem. Wait, one moment. I'm going to put it on the pedestal and I'm going to think about it. I'm going to stare at it and bow down to it. Oh, great problem. You are the most important thing right now. Instead of just knocking that fool off the pedestal, and saying, okay, problem, I've got you. I'm going to figure you out. Let's go. Let's do this. So those are the human phases that we go through with problems. So, failure is the same thing. It's just like, oh, I failed. Oh God, we can get it. And I think it's, my daughter in particular is very, very, plays very high level sports. And we were talking earlier about how, when you do something wrong, you're like, she
oh yeah,
very, very good player playing at a very high level. And when she makes a mistake on the field, she knows she made that mistake. She knows when it happens, she made that mistake. She's like, and she said, it's one thing to go in and, you're watching the replays after and you're going through them with the team. And she's like, it's one thing to watch it once or twice. She's like, when you have to watch yourself fail 14 times, it's really, there's just a point where you're like, okay, enough. And so, and that's what we also tend to do with failures. We tend to hold on to that failure as if it's the most important thing. It's, she's been playing sports for literally since she was 5 and now she's 25. She's played soccer at 9 months of the year for that entire lifespan. So, she doesn't need to watch that same replay over and over and over again to not do it again. But that's what we sometimes also do with failures. We're just like, oh, let's just look at this failure and oh, yeah, man. Oh, you really failed. That was a doozy. Let's just talk about that some more. No, let's talk about the fact that there was a failure. Let's talk about how that failure, maybe how it came to be, depending on, what the sort of the level of failure is. But most failures are not as bad as we think. And, when you start to look at failure, it's, Magic Johnson who missed, 9,000 shots. He's like, yeah, of course. But I also made 27, whatever the numbers are. But, or, how long did it take? I think we can, we can say that anybody who's owned a Dyson product loves their Dyson products, right? I can dry all of this hair. Nobody can see this because it's not on video. I have a lot of hair, but I can dry it.
It's looking good, by the way, listeners, have to say.
Thank you. For 7:30 in the morning, right? So, but it is, I can dry it 3 times faster with the Dyson. Their first product was a vacuum that Hoover rejected. They said, no, thank you. We have good vacuum technology and we know what we're doing. But do you know how many tries it took to make that Dyson?
It's a big number. I can't remember.
Right. It was 4 years and 4,500 plus tries and one very patient wife. So, just to say that, the light bulb wasn't invented in an instant. All of these things. So there's, so there's also incremental failures. But instead of saying, oh, here's this, horrible, horrible thing that happened. No, things are often going to fail at an event. So how I look at it is, did it affect the guest experience? There are many, many things that happen back of house that nobody ever knows about because it doesn't affect the guest experience. As an event designer, my very favorite thing was the relationships with the suppliers, because they would say, here's the problem that we have. Here's the 2 solutions we're recommending. Which would you like? Neither of them were going to solve neither of them were going to give me the same exact thing. But sometimes it could be, this vegetable didn't come in. We're going to replace it with that vegetable. See how that stage was set up? Okay, good. Well, now we have like 10 feet of blank space because the floor plan was wrong. Here's how we're going to solve it. There's always a solution. It just might not be the first solution that you thought of, but knowing that you're always going to have, in any organization, there will always be things that go wrong. So surround yourself with and then build the skills of people around you to solve problems. The fastest way to do that is to put them into a safe space, like an event, throw down the problems, think about how you would solve them, how you can work together to solve them. And now you are creating a solution-based organization. You look at Apollo 13, perfect example, right? Of, okay, we have astronauts in space who are dying, and they have tube socks and some frying pans or whatever they had. And 20 people, 30 people in that room took everything that was on a space shuttle and started throwing things together on the ground to tell them how they could solve their problem in space. So we're just often not very solution oriented. And when you don't have a solution, you also can't feel joy. When you don't have a solution, you have a problem, that needs to be resolved. But so much of how that gets resolved is in the attitude, right? And we've all been, every single human has been in a situation where a problem wasn't solved very well, or where somebody came with a very challenging attitude to solving that problem, or perhaps you've been the person who created. I'm sure I could probably spend all day thinking about all of the things that have gone wrong in my life and all of the reasons and the things I could have done better. That's not helpful.
But I think you make a really good point, because if we look back to the experience and wanting it to be human, then real life, right? Stuff goes wrong. It doesn't go according to plan. And actually, I always find, sure, I don't want my plane to fall out of the sky, right? So there are instances where it really does, to your point, really does matter. And if somebody gets, I don't know, electrocuted or drenched in water, right? That's not a fun thing but stuff is just not going to go according. Speakers will overrun, right? So you can try and manage these. And I always reflect about, as you were talking, I was thinking I had an experience last year where I was presenting at this thing, and basically the slides went wrong, right? And there was some AV issue. And I just was like, well, we just have to deal with this, right? We just turn it into a feature. And the funny thing was, the only thing people came up to me to talk to me afterwards was how I'd handled this screw up. And that's the bit they remembered. And at the time I was like, they haven't listened to any of the content. And then in the back of my mind, I just went, no, but they've had a great time, right? And they're probably unlikely to remember the detail of your content anyway. They will just remember that you did this thing. And so far from, if every single presentation has AV issues, we have a bigger problem. But like 1 or 2 screw ups actually makes it more endearing and, to your point, more joyful. And I'm not saying that people should deliberately curate screw ups. You don't need to do that because it'll happen anyway. To your point, is about how you respond to it. And I think there's something there's something soulless about sort of automatons turning up and expecting everything to run like clockwork, because that's just not going to happen. And so embracing this thing. And so I love that idea of you sort of just going, well, it's how we react to it that matters. And it doesn't matter that it's supposed to, professional. I guess professionalism doesn't mean not making mistakes. Professionalism means handling it appropriately.
That is, yes, exactly. That's so well said. Yes. And it's, and also just being able to sometimes just laugh at yourself. I mean, I am really, you can ask anyone that knows me. I'm the master of laughing at myself. Like, oh, yeah, just did that.
And the other thing that you were talking about that again resonated with me as somebody that speaks out and attends events is this sort of what I term the tail wagging the dog. So you get a lot of things where everything is done for the convenience of someone that's organizing it. So for example, we need you to submit your slides 8 years in advance, right? Because brackets, it's easier for us if we can upload them. And I'm the kind of I'm the sort of person that's having amazing ideas. Well, I think they're amazing ideas just before I go on. So I want to give me the maximum amount of time, not because I'm lazy, but because you'll get the best out of me. And so there's so many things that are sort of done to reassure organizers. And I get there are some speakers that are chaotic and whatever else. But then I'm like, well, why hire people like that? Hire people that you can trust to do stuff. But it's the sort of like the primacy of the process as opposed to the primacy of the experience. And my sense is, from reading in the way you talk about it, is you're all about, let's put on an amazing show. Right. This is people have to come over to, and therefore, if we have to sort of bend the process to put on the amazing show, we should do that. Right, recognizing there are certain rules you don't want to bend. Right, the safety rules are a good example of let's not mess with that particular. Yeah. But there is this kind of sense of you're back to the right. I guess to put it in very simple terms, we can overrun on the running order if people are having an amazing time. We don't want to overrun all the time, but we could do that. That's the sort of philosophy, right?
Yes, absolutely. And when I would write production schedules, the very last thing on every production schedule was like, don't spoil the magic, because the other thing that happens at events is, you're the last person in the room, you're having a great conversation. All of a sudden you look around and all the tables around you have been stripped of their linen. So I'm also the person who, just ask them to wait a couple of minutes, and I will go to that last table and just say, I can see you're having a great conversation. I will walk you to the bar and buy you a drink for you to continue the conversation there, because the team is ready to go home. But that's the best thing, is when somebody's having such a good conversation, they literally haven't noticed the entire room around them has been stripped. So yeah, I think it's what, event planning is messy. It's hard. You're relying on a lot of people. It's, they say it's one of the most stressful jobs in the world. You'll find studies out there that have us right after, like, frontline military generals and police officers. No, we are literally not saving lives. There's, if I'm saving a life, it's because something has gone very, very, very wrong at my event. But the reason it's stressful is because we are relying on all of these other people. I come up with like the greatest idea ever to create the most beautiful 1 evening, 3-day, 5-day event. And I'm relying on everything from, airlines getting people there on time, to the hotel being able to check people in on time, to hundreds of suppliers. I mentioned the quiet space earlier. That same experience was the same CEO coming on site and saying, why are all these people here on setup day? And I said, well, there's approximately 400 people on site right now, because we have 24 hours to set up for the 9,000 people to show up for this event. So she's like had no idea that that's what it would take to set up, all of the exhibits and the catering and the rooms and the audiovisual and all of those components that go into it. So we're, as the event producer, I have to know what all of those people are doing. I've given them a schedule to follow. For all of those things to be set up, I'm relying on every single person to show up and do things in the way that I need them to do it, so that we can start rehearsals, so that we can, have an event that will last for 2 to 3 days and then be torn down. So we spend a lot of time building up for something that's very temporary. The Paris opening ceremonies, which were absolutely amazing.
Insane, literally.
It probably hadn't rained on that day at that time in 100 years. So you plan for all the rain backups, and then you just watch the whole thing happen in the literally drenching rain. But there was, depending on how you want to add up the numbers, 20,000, 40,000, 80,000. By the time you add up all of the performers, all of the production personnel, all of the security, all of the, so you're relying on literally tens of thousands of people to bring an idea to life. And that's what's stressful, is that once we give away that idea, we have to do a lot of corralling. But at the end of the day, one of the other things that I say is, be a connoisseur and not a critic. It's people ask me all the time, it must be so hard for you to go to events and see things going wrong. And I was like, not anymore. Like maybe when I was 10 years into doing this, I was more critical, but 30 years later, what I understand is how hard it is. And also how important it is. If there's one thing that we learned during the pandemic, we all came out and said, oh, we're going to do things differently. No, we're doing things exactly the same.
We've just referred back.
We have. But if we could revert back to how we've been doing them and then take some of the things that we actually know about how humans want and need to meet, we'd be so far ahead. And there's so many, there's a lot of event professionals who are designing events, but there's also a lot of people who are not professionals designing events, but there's also a lot of tools for those people out there. And, if we are thinking about it together and giving people the time and the space to actually think through what every step is going to entail and how they can make it 1% better or just a little bit better. What's the one thing I could do a little bit better for people? So that at the end of the day, when you go to an event, you come into the event, you're more comfortable, you have a better experience overall. It's easy to find the food that you need to eat. One of the really big things at events is food. So one thing people talk about is one thing if you remember, whether it's good or bad. What we don't do is think of food as fuel, which is all it is when you're at an event. And guess what's not fuel? A croissant and a glass of orange juice. All we've done by giving people a continental breakfast is set them up for a 10:30 in the morning crash. What happens when you have a 10:30 in the morning crash? You're kind of grumpy. If you're kind of grumpy and uncomfortable and hungry, are you learning? No, you're thinking, I'm kind of hungry and uncomfortable. And then you go into your lunch, and your lunch could be anything, but it's often, again, not fuel. So then nobody wants to be the after lunch speaker because people have now just eaten something that's weighed them down.
Food coma, yeah.
Right? They've just weighed them down. And so now your blood isn't in your brain. This is just basic science. Your blood's not in your brain where you need it to be to process learning. It's in your stomach digesting your slightly uncomfortable meal. And then you're going to go on to, and then by the time when you can have the uncomfortable meal is at dinner, because by then you don't actually need your brain as much. But during the day, we need to be thinking of food as fuel and not accepting what are the standard menus that are often presented and questioning them and just saying, can you please go back to chef and ask them to give me something that's going to fuel my attendees and not just be something that's easy for you to put out on a buffet. So, because that also adds to the experience overall. And then again, if there's going to be a lineup, manage the lineup, make it fun, have a sleight of hand magician, have an executive introducing people, have, one of my best friends, today is still someone who I met in a line because I just decided to talk to her about the size of the shrimp. Because we can't waste those opportunities, and we waste so many of them. So don't waste opportunities. Consider joy as a KPI, honestly, because it's the only KPI from an event that's going to matter. It's not going to matter. It's going to matter what your revenue was, how many tickets you sold, some of those basic things. But what's going to matter is, what did your attendee feel? Did they leave feeling joy? They are going to return. If they can't return, they will send a friend. They will tell a friend. They will tell 27 people. And your event will continue to be successful. You don't do those things. If you're a corporation that's hosting an event and you are spending millions or tens of millions or sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars to host that event, make sure that you are creating joy through every touch point of that event. Those people work for you. You want them to continue working for you. You want them to leave this event smarter and more connected to, they say, connected to the brand. You're not like, I love my brand I work for. It's so amazing. No, I like the environment I work in with the people that I work with, selling or marketing or talking about the product that I happen to work for that brand of. Ultimately, though, it's about the people and how I feel about them. And that I can feel good about the products that I'm selling to a customer. I am happy, I'm productive, I have trust in my products and my people that I work with. That's what joy is. It can be
I love that. I think that is the perfect note. I could keep talking to you, folks. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. But before I let you go, remind people what the book is called. If they want to get hold of you to get you to do some amazing things with them, how do they do that as well?
Well, absolutely. So I'm pretty easy to find. Probably the easiest way to find me is always on LinkedIn, Tahira Endean. It's a very uncommon name. There's only one. Nobody else is going to pop up. So, and I'm always happy to connect with people that are doing great work and that are interested in talking about all kinds of things. The book is called Our KPI is Joy. Again, very unusual name, so easy to find it on Amazon. It's available around the world in lots of countries. And if people are interested, the other book that will pop up for people who are looking for more of a toolkit for event design, intentional event design as well. So
amazing. Links to all of those things in the show notes. But Tahira, thank you so much for writing a great book, for just being inspirational in the way you talk about things. I'm absolutely convinced that you will run fabulous events. So I look forward to one day going to one. But thank you for just being inspirational in a space that I think, frankly, really, really, really needs it. So I'm delighted that you were there. And thank you for sharing some amazing ideas. It's been an absolute pleasure.
well, thanks for having me. It's been a joy.
So that's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks to you for listening and to Tahira for appearing. To find out more about Tahira and her work, including her books, Our KPI is Joy and Intentional Event Design, have a look in the show notes. You'll find links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review. It really helps new listeners to find the show and lets me know what's landing with you. To discover episodes you might have missed, and there are over 330 of them now, visit the show's website, humanriskpodcast.com. I will be back very soon with another episode of the show. But in the meantime, stay safe. Think about how you might design your next meeting, event, or interaction with just a little bit more joy in mind. But above all, thank you so much for listening.